Welcome back to the basement. I'm Steve Lewis. Today we begin our deep dive into 1974, picking up more or less where episode 200, U.S. Pop Culture 1973 Part 8, left off. This will be the first year since their careers began that the Beach Boys don't release an album of new material. It'll also be the second time a Beach Boys album ever reaches number 1 on the charts. There'll be one barely released single of new material that practically no one will even hear of, and the Beach Boys will reach the top 40 for the first time in more than 5 years. 1974 will see probably more hit novelty songs, tearjerkers, and insipid bubblegum tunes than any time since the early 60s, yet Lou Reed and Frank Zappa will each place an album in the top 10 for the only time in their careers. So let's put some sequins on that denim, pick up your guitar to blast away the clouds, and let's set the Wayback Machine for the first 3 months of 1974. And we'll begin with the record chart. Now, the first record chart of the year is January 5th, 1974, and of course, most of those records are the same ones that were on the last chart of 1973. We discussed those in episode 199, U.S. Pop Culture 1973, Part 7, so I will go over them very quickly here. At number 1 on the album chart was The Carpenters, The Singles, 1969 to 1973. Having just finished an 8-week run at number 1, Elton John's Goodbye Yellow Brick Road had gone to number 2. As we discussed when we talked about 1973, singer-songwriter Jim Croce had died in a plane crash in September of 1973. His April 1972 album, You Don't Mess Around with Jim, had re-entered the charts. It was currently at number 3. It'll go to number 1 next week for a 5-week run. At number 4 was Steve Miller's The Joker. At number 5 was Neil Diamond's soundtrack to the film Jonathan Livingston Seagull. Jim Croce's final album, I Got a Name, posthumously released in December, entered the top 10 this week at number 6. It'll go to number 2 behind You Don't Mess Around with Jim on February 2nd. At number 7 was Quadrophenia by The Who. At number 8 was Ringo Starr's album Ringo. Bette Midler's self-titled album had just entered the top 10 at number 9, on its way to number 6 on January 19th. And Loggins and Messina's album Full Sail hit its number 10 peak this week. Top 10 singles on the first chart of the year were, at number 1, Time in a Bottle by Jim Croce. Steve Miller's The Joker was at number 2. Leave Me Alone, Ruby Red Dress by Helen Reddy was at number 3. The Most Beautiful Girl in the World by Charlie Rich was at number 4. Al Wilson's Show and Tell was at number 5. Smokin' in the Boys' Room by Brownsville Station was at number 6. Elton John's Goodbye Yellow Brick Road was at number 7. Never, Never Gonna Give You Up by Barry White was at number 8. And closing out the top 10 were 2 new entries this week. At number 9 was Stevie Wonder's Livin' for the City, yeah. It'll hit number 8 for 2 weeks beginning next week, January 12th. And at number 10, I've Got to Use My Imagination by Gladys Knight and the Pips, which will go to number 4 for 2 weeks beginning January 19th. Top 10 singles that will come and go in the first quarter include Helen Wheels by Paul McCartney and Wings, which will reach number 10 on January 12th. The track was a standalone single in the UK. In the US, it's included on the new Band on the Run album. You're 16 by Ringo Starr from the album Ringo, a cover of Johnny Burnett's 1960 number 8 hit, and featuring his old bandmate Paul McCartney on kazoo, will go to number 1 on January 26th. Barbra Streisand's The Way We Were, the title song from her hit movie co-starring Robert Redford, will go to number 1 on February 2nd, then return to number 1 for 2 more weeks beginning February 16th. The memorable instrumental Love's Theme by the Love Unlimited Orchestra will knock Barbra Streisand out of the number 1 spot the week of February 9th. Americans by Byron McGregor, a Canadian disc jockey reading a pro-American editorial piece written by fellow Canadian Gordon Sinclair and backed by a symphonic version of America the Beautiful, will go to number 4 on February 9th. Australian country pop singer Olivia Newton-John will have her first top 10 hit with Let Me Be There, which will go to number 6 on February 9th. Aretha Franklin's Until You Come Back to Me, That's What I'm Gonna Do will go to number 3 on February 23rd. Jim Stafford's novelty hit Spiders and Snakes will hit number 3 on March 2nd. Put Your Hands Together by the OJs will go to number 10 on March 2nd. Boogie Down by Eddie Kendricks will go to number 2 for 2 weeks beginning March 9th. Jungle Boogie by Kool and the Gang will go to number 4 on March 9th. Though he was a regular chart presence in the UK, David Essex will have his one and only US hit with Rock On, which will go to number 5 on March 9th. Eris 2, Touch the Wind, a very rare foreign language hit in the US from Spanish group Mochadadas, will hit number 9 for 2 weeks beginning March 23rd. And another single from Paul McCartney and Wings' Band on the Run album, Jet, will go to number 7 on March 30th. Among 1973 albums that will reach their chart peak early in 1974 are the soundtrack to the film American Graffiti, which had been released in August of 73 and will go to number 10 on February 9th. Released in November, Ship Ahoy by the OJs will hit number 11 on February 23rd. Released in July 73, Under the Influence of by Love Unlimited will peak at number 3 for 2 weeks beginning February 26th after Love's Theme becomes a hit single. A couple of releases from December, Tales from Topographic Oceans by Yes will go to number 6 on March 16th. And Sabbath Bloody Sabbath by Black Sabbath will go to number 11 on March 16th. Released back in October, Headhunters by Herbie Hancock will go to number 13 on March 23rd. And released way back in May of 73, Mike Oldfield's Tubular Bells will hit number 3 on March 30th due to its being featured in the hit film The Exorcist. And big new album releases in the first quarter of 1974 included on January 1st, The Way We Were by Barbra Streisand. Released on January 11th is Hotcakes by Carly Simon. On January 17th, we get Planet Waves by Bob Dylan. Helping propel the album is Dylan's first tour since 1966. Both the album and the tour featured the band. The tour began on January 3rd in Chicago and will finish in Los Angeles on February 14th after nearly 40 dates in 30 cities. Ticket prices average $8, with prime seats going for as much as $9.50, a steep price in 1974. Dylan and the band travel in rock star style on the private passenger jet, the Starship. The tour has been undertaken at the behest of David Geffen, the head of Asylum Records, Dylan's new label. The reviews and audience reaction is overwhelmingly positive, and the tour is highly lucrative. Critical and popular reaction to the album is overwhelmingly positive too. This will become the first number 1 album of Dylan's career, reaching the top of the chart for 4 weeks beginning February 26th. Also released on January 17th is Court and Spark by Joni Mitchell, and released in January is Sundown by Gordon Lightfoot and Rhapsody in White by the Love Unlimited Orchestra. Released on February 1st is the Doobie Brothers' What Were Once Vices Are Now Habits. It'll peak at number 8 on April 20th. The album will get a second life in the fall when radio stations begin playing Black Water, which will be released as a single in November. The album will eventually return to the top 10, peaking at number 4 on March 22nd, 1975, more than a year after its release. Released on February 15th was Burn by Deep Purple. It'll go to number 9 on April 20th. On February 20th comes Pretzel Logic by Steely Dan, which will go to number 8 on August 17th. On February 25th, we get Let Me In Your Life by Aretha Franklin, which will go to number 14 on May 11th. Also released in February is Unborn Child by Seals and Crofts, which will spend 2 weeks at number 14 beginning April 20th. On March 1st comes Shining On by Grand Funk with its 3D cover, complete with 3D glasses to view it. This will reach number 5 on May 18th. On March 11th comes Chicago 7, of course featuring Wishing You Were Here with Beach Boys Carl, Dennis, and Allen on backing vocals. This will go to number 1 on April 27th. Released on March 19th is Cat Stevens' Buddha and the Chocolate Box. And on March 22nd comes Frank Zappa's Apostrophe, which will hit number 10 on June 29th. Released on March 25th is Open Our Eyes by Earth, Wind, and Fire. It'll spend 2 weeks at number 15 beginning May 18th. Also released on that day is Love Song for Jeffrey by Helen Reddy. It'll eventually go to number 11 on September 21st. And finally, released in March is Stop and Smell the Roses by Mac Davis. It'll hit number 13 on September 21st and again on October 26th. Turning to movies, the average price of a movie ticket in 1974 is $1.87. Among big 1973 films still doing well at the box office as the year begins are Papillon, which starts the year at number 1 at the box office. The Exorcist will go to number 1 on January 9th for 12 weeks and will return to number 1 for 3 more weeks in June and July. The Sting will go to number 1 on April 3rd around Oscar time when it will win 7 Academy Awards, including Best Director for George Roy Hill and Best Picture of 1973. It'll then remain at number 1 for 8 of the next 10 weeks. Major new releases in the first quarter of the year include Cry of the Wild, released on January 2nd, a documentary of the lives of timber wolves and Arctic wolves in northern Canada that was years in the making. Released on February 6th is Sean Connery in a bizarre sci-fi film, Zardoz. Like pretty much all sci-fi movies of the time, it presents a dystopian future. And how they got Sean Connery to agree to that outfit, I will never know. Released on February 7th is Blazing Saddles, directed and co-written by Mel Brooks, a comedy writer probably best known at this point for his 1967 film, The Producers. Despite very mixed reviews, it will be a surprise hit, number 1 at the box office on April 17th, and eventually become the second highest grossing film of 1974. Going into wide release on February 25th is The Last Detail, starring Jack Nicholson and Randy Quaid. It had been shown in Los Angeles in December in order to qualify for consideration for the 1973 Academy Awards. It'll get 3 nominations and no wins. Going into wide release on March 17th is Andy Warhol's Frankenstein, also known as Flesh for Frankenstein. The sum total of Andy Warhol's involvement reportedly was visiting the set once and dropping by once while the film was being edited. In some markets, it's presented in 3D, which is a very rare thing at the time. Mainly, it seems to be trying to be as gory and provocative as possible. Sometimes it seems to be a satire, but it's never really clear. Nowadays, it could be described as very bad John Waters without the sense of humor. On March 29th, we get The Great Gatsby, a much hyped and stylish adaptation of the F. Scott Fitzgerald novel starring Mia Farrow and Robert Redford, who, at this point, is the number 1 top box office star in the U.S. It'll be number 1 the week of May 29th. Also opening in the U.S. on March 29th is The Three Musketeers, with Oliver Reed and Raquel Welch heading an all-star cast that included Charlton Heston as Cardinal Richelieu. And on April 4th comes The Golden Voyage of Sinbad, kind of a throwback to late 50s, early 60s adventures like The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad and Jason and the Argonauts. John Philip Law is Sinbad, but the real stars of the show are Ray Harryhausen's stop-motion monsters presented in Dynamation. It'll do well enough for there to be 2 Dynamation follow-ups, Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger in 1977 and Clash of the Titans in 1981. As discussed when we talked about the 1973 TV season in episode 198, it was notable for the high number of new shows that failed. In January, the networks began dropping some of those shows and adding mid-season replacements. On Tuesday, January 15th, ABC replaces the New Temperatures Rising show, one of the fall TV season's big flops, with a new sitcom, Happy Days. It's a gentle family comedy about a teenager growing up in the 1950s. The show is loosely based on a segment that aired on Love American Style in February 1972 called Love and the Television Set, which featured Ronnie Howard as a teenager in the early 50s and Anson Williams as his friend Potsy. For the series, most of the other roles were recast and the time period was moved forward slightly to the rock and roll late 50s. Ron Howard stars as Milwaukee high school student Richie Cunningham. Formerly billed as Ronnie Howard, he's familiar to TV audiences as Opie from The Andy Griffith Show. Significantly, he had also had a starring role in last year's hit movie American Graffiti, which had so successfully tapped into the same vein of nostalgia that Happy Days was hoping to hit. Other cast members include Gavin O'Herlihy and Aaron Moran as Richie's brother and sister, Chuck and Joni. Tom Bosley is his unlikely-looking father, and Marion Ross is his mother. Famously, Chuck Cunningham will mysteriously vanish from the show and is never mentioned again after the 10th episode. Reportedly, he was the character Richie was supposed to go to for advice. As things developed, supporting character Fonzie was occupying that role, so with no further need of Chuck, he's quietly dropped and the Cunninghams become a 2-child family. Henry Winkler is featured as the cool greaser or hood character Arthur Fonzarelli, known as Fonzie. Winkler had also recently filmed a role in the 50s nostalgia movie The Lords of Flatbush, which had yet to be released. In its first season, Happy Days will be a moderate hit, finishing the 73-74 season in 16th place. On Friday, January 25th, the Brady Bunch introduces a new character, Cousin Oliver, played by young Robbie Rist in the episode Welcome Aboard. By the 5th season, the Brady kids were all considerably older, and Oliver was obviously introduced to bring a younger element back to the show. Oliver won't reverse the show's sagging ratings. To be fair, it was certainly not his fault. Already in the 5th season, we'd seen the show getting further and further out. We'd seen Greg get a shot at rock superstardom in the season opener, Adios Johnny Bravo. Football star Joe Namath turn up at the Brady home to help lying Bobby Brady avoid social embarrassment. Peter double date with Greg and two older girls wearing a phony mustache that wouldn't fool anybody. The entire family banding together to keep self-pitying Jan from thinking of herself as a no talent. A winner-takes-all driving competition between Greg and Marcia, and Greg's UFO hoax played on Peter and Bobby, leading to a government investigation. Before the season is out, Peter will meet his doppelganger, Cindy will become convinced she's about to become the new Shirley Temple, and the hair tonic that Bobby sells Greg will turn his hair orange just before graduation. And let's not forget that the Brady Bunch is on opposite the third highest rated show on TV, NBC's Sanford and Son. As we can see, the Brady Bunch didn't need Cousin Oliver to implode. The show will be canceled at the end of the season. On Friday, February 8th, 2 weeks after we meet the Cunningham family of Milwaukee, comes another show about a family of 5 set further down the west coast of Lake Michigan and nearly 2 decades later. Another series from Norman Lear, Good Times, is a spin-off of Maude, which was a spin-off of All in the Family. It stars Esther Roll and John Amos as parents trying to raise their family in the Chicago projects. Of course, the focus of the series will change considerably when Jimmy Walker, as the wisecracking oldest son JJ, breaks out as the star of the show with his popular catchphrase, say it with me, Dynamite! The series will be a major hit, and we'll talk more about it later. Replacing the new Perry Mason show with Monty Markham, another of the fall season's big flops on Sunday, February 10th, is Apple's Way. From Earl Hamner, the creator of the highly successful The Waltons, comes this series about a family relocating from Southern California to the father's hometown of rural Appleton, Iowa. Like The Waltons, it's meant to tell heartwarming family stories. Where The Waltons' 1930s setting gave it a storybook-like quality, setting Apple's Way in the present made it come across incredibly cornball, with family interactions having only the vaguest resemblance to actual human behavior. It'll be reworked with Franny Michelle replaced by Christy McNichol in the role of the younger daughter for a second season. Somehow the reworking will actually make it weirder and less grounded in any sort of reality. It'll be canceled midway through its second season in January 1975. In news, on January 2nd, President Nixon signs into law a national speed limit of 55 miles per hour with a view toward reducing gasoline consumption during the ongoing energy crisis. The new speed limit goes into effect on March 1st. On February 4th, 19-year-old newspaper heiress Patricia Hearst is abducted from her Berkeley, California apartment in a bizarre kidnapping. A small left-wing urban guerrilla group called the Symbionese Liberation Army, or SLA, claims responsibility for the abduction and issues demands. Over the next several weeks, some of the demands are met, but not to the satisfaction of the SLA, who refuse to release Hearst. On February 8th, the third and final crew of Skylab returned to Earth after 84 days in space, having completed many experiments and observations of the comet Kohoutek. With no more missions scheduled, Skylab is abandoned. Things were looking up for the Beach Boys as 1974 began. Their excellent album Beach Boys in Concert peaks at number 25 on January 26th. With Blondie Chaplin having left the band in December, James William Garcio begins standing in occasionally on bass. He also begins assisting in management of the band, in addition to his existing duties as manager and producer of Chicago and Blood, Sweat, and Tears. As the year commenced, it had been 51 weeks since the Beach Boys' last studio album, Holland. I'm sure most fans assumed a new one would be forthcoming. Thanks for watching. That's all we have time for. See you next time. Bye.